What if every plea for peace is just a carefully engineered mirage, and true reconciliation is so distant that no one at the negotiating tables truly wants it? Picture this. On global television, diplomats and presidents stand before the world's cameras, calling for ceasefires, waving olive branches, and invoking the hallowed legacy of the Olympic truce. Italy's foreign minister, France's president, and officials in Brussels echo the same refrain. Pause the fighting. Let the Olympic spirit unite warring nations. Let diplomacy guide us back from the brink. Their words are polished, their promises sweeping, and their intentions, at least on the surface, seem noble and clear. But peel back that surface and the reality emerges, much starker and more complicated. In Ukraine, even quietly suggesting peace talks can spark outrage, suspicion, or ridicule. Within Kyiv's political class, negotiations are not just dismissed, they are cast as acts of near treason. Recent surveys show that nearly 6 out of every 10 Ukrainians believe only military victory is acceptable, and most categorically reject any compromise or territorial concession, no matter the cost. This conviction is not just political, it's personal, etched into daily life by years of war and loss. Across Europe, leaders in Rome and Paris refuse to abandon their calls for dialogue, but both Kyiv and Moscow dismiss these overtures almost instantly. The divide between public statements and battlefield actions grows ever wider. It is as if rhetoric and reality have become distant rivals, locked in a contest for the world's attention. The world is left to wonder, are these peace efforts sincere, or are they simply elaborate performances, acts in a prolonged political theater, designed to reassure, distract, or delay? If we fall for empty promises and choreographed summits, history warns us, we risk being blindsided when these words dissolve into renewed violence. Trust in global assurances can collapse overnight. The question echoes through every capital. How did peace become a slogan instead of a unifying goal? What does this ever-widening chasm between words and actions mean for Ukraine's future, and for the world's? The facade of diplomacy today masks an accelerating arms race and deepening mistrust. Behind every televised handshake, behind every photo opportunity, preparations for long-term conflict quietly escalate. The pattern is not unique to this conflict. Throughout history, peace talks have often served as pauses in the action, not true ends to violence. Consider the Vietnam War. The Paris Peace Accords were hailed as the dawn of a new era, yet fighting continued in new forms almost immediately after the ink dried. Or reflect on the endless summits and ceasefires during the Balkan wars of the 1990s, many of which served as pauses for rearmament rather than genuine settlements. Why do urgent calls for a ceasefire echo across headlines, only to be dismissed within hours? The answer is not just stubbornness, nor is it simply pride. It is a warning sign. The distance between diplomatic ceremony and the brutal reality of war in Ukraine and across Europe has become a yawning chasm. This disconnect is a signal, not just a symptom. Just days ago, Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, stood before the world and proposed a global Olympic truce. The idea was almost poetic. As the world's athletes prepare to compete in Paris, let guns fall silent, if only for a moment, so that sport and peace might share the stage. France's Emmanuel Macron made a similar appeal before him, invoking the Olympic spirit as a force to silence weapons, if only temporarily. Both times, the response from Kyiv and Moscow was swift, unyielding, and cold. Not now. Not when each side sees victory as dependent on more fighting, not less. Not when every pause is perceived as a risk to survival, a threat to momentum. Inside Ukraine, this refusal is more than politics. It is visceral, born of survival and trauma. Recent polls reveal a hard resolve. Nearly 4 in every 10 Ukrainians are certain their country will ultimately defeat Russia. Another third are mostly confident. Together, almost 6 in every 10 place their hope in outright military victory. More than 6 in every 10 reject any talk of giving up territory or abandoning the Western path. For most, surrender or compromise is not only unthinkable, it is offensive, almost a betrayal of those who have sacrificed everything. Yet optimism now collides with hard truths. The front lines are exhausted, supplies run thin. Casualties climb relentlessly on both sides, while the language of peace grows fainter, almost foreign. Each week, the gulf between hopeful speeches and the lived reality of shelling, blackouts, and loss grows wider. It is a pattern seen in countless conflicts, from the trenches of the First World War, where Christmas truces were followed by renewed slaughter, to the Middle East, where peace negotiations are often mere preludes to fresh offensives. Meanwhile, Western patience is stretched to its limit. European support, once unwavering, now wavers with each passing month. Yet for Kyiv, clinging to Western alliances is non-negotiable. This stance, more than slogans or speeches, forms the backbone of Ukraine's survival strategy. It is seen as existential, not optional. History is filled with examples where alliances have meant the difference between survival and collapse, from the Allied stand in World War II to NATO's role in deterring Soviet expansion during the Cold War. The real danger is subtle, easy to miss. If we take peace talks or Olympic truces at face value, we risk badly misreading the moment. This is not simply about saving face or defending borders. It is about systems, political, military, and social, that reward escalation, punish compromise, and make each new call for peace feel more distant than the last. The incentives at play are powerful, often invisible. They shape decisions, harden positions, and make flexibility dangerous. The issue is not just national pride or public hope. To grasp why real peace feels impossible, we have to dig into the deeper forces at work, the machinery of conflict itself. In many ways, the incentives for leaders on all sides now tilt toward prolonging the struggle, not resolving it. History offers numerous examples. The Korean War, frozen in an uneasy armistice for decades. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where peace processes often become arenas for blame and posturing, not solutions. Who stands to gain from peace remaining out of reach? In Ukraine today, even uttering the word peace can mark you as a traitor. For many within the political elite and the media, peace has become synonymous with capitulation, a prospect that inspires fear, anger, or even disgust. The pressure to conform is immense. Take former President Viktor Yushchenko. He does not simply urge the defense of Ukraine, he calls for advances all the way to Moscow. His language leaps past Ukraine's borders, fueling hopes and ambitions that, for most, are simply unattainable. These declarations are more than chest-thumping. They set the boundaries of patriotism, defining what is considered acceptable, even heroic. In this way, public rhetoric shapes not only policy, but also identity, loyalty, and dissent. Yet away from grand speeches, the front lines tell another story. Reports indicate that Russian forces continue to push forward, but in Kyiv, leaders and commentators double down on promises of sweeping victories. Any mention of compromise is quickly dismissed, and the gulf between official optimism and battlefield reality grows wider by the day. To question the official narrative has become almost taboo. This is not unique to Ukraine. In countless wars, from the American Civil War to the Vietnam conflict, dissent was often painted as treason or cowardice, while official optimism obscured mounting costs. Across the ocean and in European capitals, leaders face their own crisis. In Brussels and Washington, officials are caught between supporting Kyiv's unwavering stance and addressing their own citizens' fears about security, escalation, and economic costs. They worry about provoking a larger conflict, but dread appearing weak or abandoning a key ally even more. The political risks are enormous, and the consequences of miscalculation can be disastrous. Beneath the surface, a careful game is unfolding. Political and military leaders on all sides recognize that the specter of escalation is a potent bargaining chip. The more intense the danger appears, the easier it becomes to justify requests for more weapons, increased funding, or new diplomatic concessions from wary partners and allies. This dynamic is not new. During the nuclear arms race of the 20th century, Each side used the threat of escalation to extract support, secure resources, and build alliances. Ignore these incentives, and you risk being swept up by emotional appeals that obscure the deeper calculations behind every major decision. The public narrative is rarely just about values or ideals. It is about power, leverage, and the rewards of keeping hostilities unresolved. In the Cold War, the rhetoric of peace was often a mask for strategic maneuvering. In the Middle East, peace summits have sometimes been used to buy time or shift blame. If each side now regards peace as either surrender or a perilous trap, what does that mean for the path ahead? How are leaders, on every front, preparing for the new long war taking shape before our eyes? The stage is set for a prolonged struggle, one that demands new strategies, redefined expectations, and perhaps a willingness to endure costs few are prepared to face. But beneath the surface, the costs of this hardening conflict are already mounting. Civilian lives are upended, economies are strained, and the fabric of societies is stretched thin. In Bosnia in the 1990s, years of negotiation and intermittent fighting left scars that have yet to heal. In Afghanistan, decades of shifting alliances and broken truces led to cycles of hope and devastation. When threats turn into reality, what remains of peace? As diplomats pose for cameras and urge Olympic ceasefires, the situation on the ground grows ever more ominous. The United States now weighs whether to send long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, a prospect that reverberates through Moscow, Brussels, and Washington alike. Even discussing these weapons stretches the war's shadow across thousands of kilometers, making every government in Europe reconsider what tomorrow could bring. Inside the heated chambers of government, American leaders jostle for position. Figures like Donald Trump alternate between pledging limitless support and warning that aid could disappear overnight. This unpredictability is not confusion, it is strategy. The very uncertainty is wielded as a tool, with the fate of powerful weapons dangled as both promise and threat, keeping every side wary, every negotiation tense. Ukrainian officials walk a delicate line. In public, they claim not to need advanced missiles, often downplaying their urgency. Behind closed doors, they press for every weapon, every new system, urging Western partners to cross red lines they once swore were uncrossable. The message is unmistakable. To survive, Ukraine must secure every advantage, no matter how controversial. The pattern mirrors other conflicts, such as Israel's pursuit of advanced weaponry during existential threats, or South Korea's lobbying for American support during periods of high tension. The stakes are stark. Once long-range missiles arrive, restraint becomes almost impossible to guarantee. Control slips away as the fog of war thickens. A single launch deep inside Russian territory could ignite consequences that can never be undone. Each new shipment blurs the line between support and participation, between defense and provocation. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 offers a sobering historical parallel. A single miscalculation, a single launch, and the world was on the edge of nuclear war. NATO, meanwhile, is hardening its eastern flank. American armored brigades now stand ready in Estonia. German battalions have taken up positions in Lithuania. Command centers are being established in Finland. Officially, these deployments are defensive, but the infrastructure they create could easily serve offensive aims if the situation deteriorates. This is not just about holding the line, it is about being prepared to strike back at a moment's notice. The line between deterrence and provocation, between defense and escalation, grows ever thinner. Across the continent, leaders speak the language of peace while bracing their nations for broader war. The costs, human, financial, and existential, are mounting, and most societies are not ready to bear them. Many citizens remain unaware of just how quickly militarization is advancing, trusting in diplomatic assurances that could vanish in an instant if the situation spirals out of control. The gap between public perception and strategic reality is a recurring theme in history, from the slow build-up to World War I, where alliances and mobilizations escaped public scrutiny, to the more recent failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, where official optimism masked deepening crises. So, has Europe already crossed a hidden threshold, or is there still time to pull back before the conflict expands beyond anyone's control? The question is not academic. In the summer of 1914, a handful of decisions, seemingly minor at the time, set the world on a path to disaster. In the Balkans of the 1990s, international hesitation allowed violence to spiral. In Syria, red lines were drawn, then erased, with catastrophic consequences. The lesson: thresholds are often invisible until they are crossed. As the boundaries between defense and offense continue to blur, the question of who controls the next move grows urgent. The answer could determine the fate of millions. In the nuclear era, this question was called the balance of terror, the fear that a single action could unleash unimaginable destruction. Today, the balance may be less absolute, but the risks are no less real. How do you pierce the mask of weaponized peace? The first step is to recognize that when leaders invoke peace, they are often not seeking to end conflict, but to strengthen their own hand. Words become tools, virtue signals, delay tactics, bargaining chips, not true invitations to compromise. This is not cynicism, but realism, born of centuries of experience. Consider the endless peace conferences of the Middle East, where each side uses negotiations to regroup, rearm, or gain international sympathy, but rarely to yield core demands. Listen for the gap between official statements and reality. When peace talks or ceasefires fill headlines, military activity can quietly surge. Troops redeploy, new weapons arrive, alliances intensify, all while politicians keep praising diplomacy. In the lead-up to the Six-Day War in 1967, both sides engaged in furious diplomatic activity, even as military preparations accelerated. With every fresh weapon system, every joint exercise, the cost of retreat rises. Each step, meant to reassure, can actually make it harder for anyone to yield without looking weak. Instead of opening doors, these actions quietly fortify the walls that divide. The same dynamic played out in the Cold War's arms race, where each new missile made de-escalation more dangerous politically. Beware of stories that sound simple or rousing. Every side uses stirring rhetoric, calls for heroic resistance, noble peace, or total victory, to justify taking a harder stance. These narratives are crafted to inspire loyalty and silence doubts, not to tell the whole truth. In the Falklands War, both Britain and Argentina invoked national honor, making compromise almost impossible. The reality can shift overnight. Today's assurances may evaporate by morning, replaced by sudden moves or escalation. Ordinary people risk being blindsided, unable to adjust or safeguard their interests in time. Consider the millions caught off guard by the Russian invasion in 2022, or the Yugoslav civilians who awoke to sudden bombardment in the 1990s. If you cannot separate theater from preparation, you lose the ability to make wise choices, or to see the next storm before it breaks. So, after all the noise and grandstanding, what is the real lesson, and what comes next? The signs are clear, but the consequences are still unfolding. To prepare, you need to look beyond headlines, read between the lines, and study the patterns of history. If everyone speaks of peace but moves toward war, what should you trust? The answer is uneasy, but vital. Actions matter more than words. Across Ukraine and Europe, peace is displayed at summits and in proclamations, yet almost nobody makes real preparations for it. Instead, leaders reinforce borders, increase weapons shipments, and steal their populations, each step pointing not to dialogue, but to looming confrontation. This is not unprecedented. In the years before World War II, the world heard plenty of peace talk, from the Munich Agreement to endless League of Nations meetings, while militarization raced ahead in the shadows. When Rome invokes Olympic truces and noble pauses, Kyiv counters with strategies reaching far beyond its own frontiers. In Brussels, the Polish is on armor, not olive branches. Public opinion turns compromise into a dirty word. Surveys show that for many, peace now sparks suspicion or even anger. The myth of peace, whether wrapped in Olympic rings or political speeches, becomes just another kind of shield. In this climate, the greatest danger is believing in peace while the gears of conflict grind on. If you are lulled by hopeful language and ignore the visible preparations, you risk being caught unaware. Trusting words, not actions, is a luxury that in times like these can leave you exposed and unprepared. The story of the Maginot Line in France offers a cautionary tale. A society trusting in assurances of security, only to be bypassed by events they had not imagined. So what is the hard lesson here? Do not mistake rhetoric for reality. Watch what governments build, fund, and mobilize, not just what they promise. Prepare yourself, both mentally and practically, for a world shaped by deeds rather than declarations. Your security, understanding, and future resilience depend on this vigilance. That means staying informed, questioning narratives, diversifying your sources of information, and planning for contingencies, whether as a citizen, an investor, or a policymaker. True peace cannot be conjured by slogans or imposed by distant proposals. It only arrives when all sides genuinely want it, something that, by every sign and survey today, remains heartbreakingly remote. But history also teaches that change is possible, sometimes when it seems most unlikely. The Helsinki Accords of 1975, for example, emerged after decades of tension, opening the door to dialogue even in the depths of the Cold War. The Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland arrived after years of violence seemed unbreakable. Yet as the gulf between words and actions widens, one question persists. How should you read the world when every player is following a different script? The answer is to read with skepticism, to measure words against actions, and to remember the lessons of history. Only then can you hope to see clearly, prepare wisely, and perhaps one day help bridge the gap between illusion and peace.